Hey there, I am D. It has become something of an annual tradition to me. Yeah, last Halloween I went to the movie theaters to watch a few horror movies. Though this year they were a bit generous by showing us 4 horror movies at once. But right now you probably have another question in mind, like why do I look a little sillier today than I usually do? Well, let's just say, like I said, I went to the theaters and, well, they were passing these around. But, yeah, I probably look a little too silly right now. But anyway, which movies did I watch and what did I think of them? Apollo 18. Anyone familiar with NASA and much of its history knows that Apollo 18 was a project that was, well, it was scheduled to take people to the moon, but for whatever reason it got cancelled. So, a movie that is basically about a trip to the moon that never happened? How could that possibly be interesting? But what if I told you the following? There are many people who have these conspiracy theories about the notion that humans never made it to the moon. And anyone who says we do, well, there's a whole cover-up going on. There are these... all the footage we've ever seen is really something that Stanley Kubrick made, something along those lines. So therefore, Apollo 18 is more interesting because usually the conspiracy is we never made it to the moon and for whatever reason NASA wants us to think we have. But Apollo 18 is implying we did make it to the moon, we're just lying about it. Go figure. Now, the movie, well, it's made in a somewhat similar fashion as Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and other movies, in that the characters themselves operate the cameras. And, well, say what you will about that sort of movie, but in this case it raises a few more questions than it answers any. But unfortunately, if I give any more details, I'll probably be spoiling the ending for you, so let's not go there. But one other thing that could make this movie interesting is that usually with space movies of this genre, it's all about people in a distant future going to visit aliens or whatever. But like I said, it's usually in a distant future, so we have all the advanced technologies we may or may not need to survive them. But in this case, so it's not taking place in the future, but in a distant past. Okay, distant from my perspective, but so the point is they are using rudimentary equipment. Rudimentary when compared to the things you usually come across in sci-fi. So whatever it is, they have to fight and trying to escape from. They have to use rudimentary equipment rather than some high-tech stuff that you usually see in science fiction movies. So that alone should make this movie, in a way, did make this movie more interesting. Don't be afraid of the dark. Admittedly, this one was the weakest of the movies. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is kind of interesting. I mean, generally in movies of this genre, the focus is always on some adult person, and even if it involves a kid, it's rarely on the kid. The kid always seems to know more than the adults do, but rarely do we ever focus on the kid. And that's where this movie differs, as the focus is constantly on this one little girl. But the movie in many ways is also a huge failure. I mean, the monster, or monsters in this case, well, let's just say we already know what they are from the very beginning, even before they actually say what they are. And we actually even see them far too early in this movie. And when we do see them, they look like walking potatoes. The Thing. This one is the most obscure of the four movies. But, well, you need to know a little about this history to understand how it's so obscure. So first off, there was this short story that was written in the 1930s called Who Goes There? Then in the 1950s, loosely based on the short story, came the movie The Thing from Another World. Mind you, I say loosely, because if you read the story and watch the movie, you'll notice they're nothing alike. They have little to nothing to do with one another. Then in the 1980s, this movie came along. And unlike The Thing from Another World, of which this one is supposed to be a remake, this one actually stays more true to the short story, Who Goes There? So this one, calling this a remake of A Thing from Another World is like calling The Thing from Another World an adaptation of Who Goes There. So no, this one is a true adaptation of Who Goes There. So now that you know that much, what is this recent movie called The Thing? Well, most of the time that I came across it on the internet, it was advertised as a remake of this movie. But having actually seen the movie, well, the end credits mention the short story Who Goes There, and well, I didn't see it, but so as far as I know, it doesn't mention Carpenter's movie in any way, shape or form. And, well, having only recently rewatched this movie, actually only just rewatched this movie, I noticed that the recent move, not this thing, but the more recent thing, was actually a prequel to this movie. Okay, if it's a prequel, why wasn't it called Birth of the Thing, or anything, rather than just The Thing, implying it's a remake? Also, why make a prequel anyway? I mean, it's not like the movie told us anything we didn't already know. But, well, despite all that, I guess I was entertained by that movie, I'll admit that much. But still, it was unnecessary. It didn't have to be made. Even if it was a remake, it still didn't have to be made. Where do I begin? First of all, this movie, while called Paranormal Activity 3, it is really a prequel to number 1. But also, in the first movie it was implied that the character Katie Featherston had little to none at all, evidence that she even was haunted by some ghost, so it makes sense why anyone would even want to keep a record, would always keep a camera somewhere in the house, so to show she's indeed haunted. But number 3 is implying that there were cameras around when she was a child. So she already had a record of all this. So in other words, if the events of number 3 did happen, we wouldn't even have a first movie. Wrap your head around that one. But that's not even the worst bit. I mean, in the first movie it was explicitly mentioned that this ghost was always taunting Katie. She had a little sister as well, but she was left alone. It was Katie who was always haunted by this guy. or this thing, whatever it was. So why is this third movie implying that this ghost is some kind of... or behaving as though it were some imaginary friend to the little sister? It makes no sense. But you know, one thing I do wonder is... this movie had only one indication that it indeed takes place during the 80s, as they're implying. That indication being a Teddy Ruxpin doll. Now, anyone who's familiar with a certain critic would realize the irony in putting a Teddy Ruxpin doll in a horror movie. But bearing that in mind, that would mean that whoever made this movie is familiar with internet critics. Well, if they are, then why don't they take anything into account when making anything these critics say into account when they made this movie? Huh. Guess we'll never find that one out. Final verdict. Don't be afraid of the dark. Well, you can watch it if you want, but personally I don't recommend it. Apollo 18... well, I suppose if you liked The First Man in the Moon, you'll also like this one. The Thing... well, I guess you could if you want to. And Paranormal Activity... well, I still have a few mixed feelings about that one, but... I mean, like I said, it contradicts the first movie, but it was the scariest of the bunch. I don't know, you watch it and you make up your own opinion. This was D, I'm signing off.